perfect. It is the perfect weather for flying FPV. If you've got the Darwin FPV Hulky, which is advertised as a waterproof quadcopter. And that should mean you could fly it in the rain, no problem, right? Right? I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. And so the first thing I notice is this little wiggliness on the yaw axis. Right there. At first I thought maybe it was a loose prop, but it isn't. It isn't, because I wouldn't be flying if it was a loose prop and I would hear the squealing. The second thing I notice is the RSSI DBM warning that I'm seeing, and the reason for that, my RSSI DBM is fine. You can see in the bottom of the screen, it's at -65, and Express LRS, let's see, I'm at 250 hertz, and that's good down to like -105. So I have plenty of RSSI, but the threshold has not been set correctly. This was shipped with a built-in Express LRS receiver, but it doesn't look like they... Oh, hello. Power wires. It doesn't look like they customized the configuration for Express LRS. I would suggest that you change the DBM to at least like minus 105 or -100. Don't seem to be being affected by flying in the rain. Decent prop wash handling there coming over the trees. Didn't see a lot of prop wash or anything. It's fine. Oh yeah, that's analog for you. Video transmitter is 600 milliwatts, and I am not optimally placed because I'm standing facing the camera instead of standing facing where I would normally face, but 600 milliwatts seems to be hanging okay. We'll check that on the bench, and we'll see if it's legit 600 milliwatts or not. It probably will be. Oh, just went down. Did I fail safe? Surely not. What the hell? The throttle has stopped responding. I don't know what's happened. I have no throttle control. My switches are not responding. When I arm, I can see the quadcopter move as if the props are spinning. It's acting like it's in failsafe, but like I totally have link. Like you can see, I don't know if you can see on the GoPro, but my RSSI is like -20 dBm, full LQ. I'm gonna try a power cycle and just see if it comes back to life. I don't know why I was worried about getting it muddy. It's waterproof. It's the easiest damn thing in the world to clean. Let's see if it still flies after that. It fell out of the air the last time when I was pushing it a little bit. Doesn't seem like the voltage dropped out. I checked the DVR. Could have been a fluke, I guess. The tune is not spectacular. Lots of prop wash oscillation and skidding. It's probably they're thinking more cinematic flying because that's when you would like be flying over water. You wouldn't freestyle over water probably. I don't know, maybe you would. As long as you don't fly it too aggressively, it seems like it hangs in there pretty well. It's waterproof. I mean, I kind of expected to fly it in the rain, and you can fly non-waterproof quadcopters in the rain and get away with it a lot of the time. So that was just kind of for the internet to, I'm flying in the rain. But then I was pretty sure that if I just repeatedly dunked it in water, like not just once, but like a bunch of times, and spun the props and really threw the water around, that it would die. And then I'd be like, see, it wasn't waterproof, but I was really trying to kill it, and it didn't die. So it's waterproof. In fact, they say that it is IP67 rated. IP6 means completely protected from ingress, from dust and particles and sticks and pokey things and whatever. And then the IP67, the 7 means it is rated for full immersion in water up to 1 meter for up to 30 minutes, I believe. And I didn't leave it in water for 30 minutes, but it certainly seems to have lived up to that. A closer look at the flight controller and the ESC shows us how Darwin FPV achieves this. The flight controller and the ESC are fully encased in metal, and I believe it's also been potted in some kind of a compound that helps keep the water out and protects against any moisture that might get in there. The only part of the flight controller and ESC that is exposed are the motor connectors here, and you might think, well, if I'm fully submerged and I've got these electrical connections here, could the electricity jump through the water and short circuit? And it turns out that most water is not really that conductive. It's not the conductiveness of the water that kills your electronics. A lot of the times it is actually the corrosiveness, the minerals that are left behind, or God forbid if it's salt water, then it's just incredibly corrosive and it damages your electronics. So it's not a big deal as it might seem that these contacts are exposed. And in fact, if Darwin FPV was really doing their job, they'd have conformal coated them. Let's find out if they did. Yeah, sure enough. No beeps at all from the motor wires. If those were exposed electrically, then I would have gotten a beep from my probes. The fact that I didn't means that they're almost certainly conformal coated or some other kind of coating that is going to prevent water from causing electrical conductivity and protect against corrosion. Well done, Darwin FPV. Continuing our way around, we can also see that Darwin FPV have sealed these plugs with some kind of adhesive, which is keeping the plug installed, of course, but more importantly, keeping moisture out. My exposed USB port certainly looks like a problem. It ships with a little plug, and in fact, they ship it with some spare plugs in case you lose them. And you could 3D print USB plugs, are not really hard to get a hold of, but you would normally plug that after you were done setting up the quadcopter and before you dunked it in water a bunch of times. Yeah. That plug was totally installed when I dunked mine in water a bunch of times. I definitely didn't forget to put it back in after I changed the quadcopter's configuration and then fly and dunk in the water with the plug missing. What about the motors? How can they be waterproofed? It turns out that motors are actually fairly waterproof to begin with. The wire that's used inside the motor stator is enamel coated, and that is basically waterproof. The rest of the motor is just metal, and it's made of aluminum typically, so it's not going to be an issue. The real weak point of the motor from the perspective of water is the bearing. The bearings cannot be completely sealed because completely sealed bearings have too much friction and drag to be used in high RPM applications like multi-rotor. So the bearings that are used in multi-rotors are almost always sort of semi-sealed. They are packed with grease, and there is a shield covering the balls which keeps most dirt out but is not completely sealed against water. I expect that over time, if you continue to expose this to water, the bearings would eventually rust, especially if you expose them to salt water. They're going to instantly rust, and that would sort of be the limitation on how often you could dunk this thing. Oh, I take it back. Well, something's in there, but I don't know if that's in the bearing or just in the bell. There's some dirt in there. Oh, that's not. That doesn't feel good. Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's real. That's actually that's the bearing having a problem for sure. Oh yeah, okay. Well, it is what it. Oh, ooh, that's not good. The Hulk has a 600 milliwatt analog video transmitter. 600 milliwatts is certainly enough to get usable range, although we'd always like to see more. The best video transmitters today are shipping with between 1 watt, maybe 1.5 watts or more of output power. 600 milliwatts gets it done, though. It is not particularly waterproofed. It is in an aluminum shell, but well, I can't get the camera on it, but the MMCX connector for the antenna is just stuck in there, and there is no sort of glue or grease or anything sealing it off. So I gotta wonder, if you were to soak this thing underwater for a long enough time, could enough water get into that antenna connector that it would cause a reduction in performance? That's at least a concern I have. And given how much attention Darwin FPV put to waterproofing the whole rest of the quad, seems like a little bit of an oversight that they didn't take the step to waterproof the MMCX connector on the video transmitter. Let's just double check the video transmitter's output power. I've got it hooked up here to my Immersion RC RF power meter, and we'll just power it up here. And it's set to 600 milliwatts, which is its rated max output power, and I'm measuring it at closer to 800. Let me just, as far as I can tell, all the settings are correct, the frequency, etc. is all correct. I guess that's good. It's also doing a pretty good job of hanging in there without overheating, although it eventually will I guess the aluminum shell is helping it with its heat dissipation, but it's just hanging in there around pretty close to 800. That's nice, because frankly, the 600 I was like, and I hear 800, I'm like, and I know that there's not that much difference between 600 and 800, but I don't know, 800 is about where I'm like, okay. 1,000, I'm like, yeah. And at like 1,500, I'm like, yeah. Like that Vince McMahon meme. No, just me. And at 600, I'm like, And then at 400, I'm like, and then like below 400, I'm just like, I guess we're racing, because let's just all be at 25. All right. Video transmitter basically checks out. The control link is Express LRS. This flight controller has built-in 2.4 gigahertz Express LRS, and of course that's what I use to fly it. The Express LRS antenna is just a little dipole. It's nothing fancy, and the performance and range could certainly be improved with a higher quality antenna, but Express LRS has pretty extraordinary range and penetration anyway, so you'll probably be able to make this work. You might just not be able to run it at the highest packet rates and get the longest range possible. Incidentally, this right here is where the Express LRS antenna wire goes into the flight controller. So if you're thinking, well, I'll just pop that connector off and install a better antenna, it's not going to be that simple. You're going to have to work around the waterproofing to get that done. Well, this is not just a waterproof quadcopter, but it's also a quadcopter, and there are some aspects of the review that I wouldn't want to overlook just because I was so focused on how waterproof the dang thing was. And one of them is the motors. These are 2204 motors, and like, there's just no way to put this except to say that that's a very small motor for a 5-inch quadcopter, especially one that's going to be carrying a GoPro. Obviously, it flew okay, right? You saw it fly, and I don't think that it flew like terrible, but a 2204 motor would be great for like a 300 gram or 350 gram 3.5 or 4-inch quadcopter. On a 5-inch, that's just significantly less torque, less stator volume, less torque, less responsiveness, and potentially more heat buildup. Although, hey, if you're flying in the rain, maybe you don't have to worry about heat buildup. It's just a really small motor for a 5-inch quadcopter, and I'm kind of can't explain why they did that. It's not like they're hurting for weight, right? And the additional weight of a larger motor would probably be more than made up by performance. So that's going to compromise durability. It's going to compromise handling if you're trying to fly very aggressively. And it's probably the single biggest criticism I have of the sort of parts that went into this build. But this frame design is a little bit retro. There was a period of time when this style of frame with vertical plates for the body and then attaching to a horizontal base plate was really, really popular. And people moved away from it, and I think one reason they moved away from it is that the complexity of when you have two parallel plates, then you got some standoffs that go between them and some screws, and you're done, right? You got a nice durable frame. But when you have a vertical plate that has to join to a horizontal plate, you have to figure out some way to accomplish that joint. It adds complexity. It can be difficult to repair. It can be difficult, and it can compromise durability. Darwin FPV have done this in a way that I don't think I've seen before, which is that they've got these 3D printed pieces, and the 3D printed piece is sandwiched by the two bottom plates. So here's the arm coming in here, here's the bottommost plate, and here is the upper bottom plate, if you want to call it that. And then there's a little bit of a T shape here that is sandwiched and held in by the bottom plates. And then the two vertical top plates, the body plates, if you will, screw into it. And this 3D printed piece is what holds it all together. And there's a similar mechanism in the front. It's very clever, and I think it might be one of the smarter ways to do this that I've seen. The TPU is going to have a little bit of flex and a little bit of give. So you'll have potentially some vibration isolation between the motors and the camera, potentially. But more importantly, the TPU is going to flex in a crash, and as long as it holds together, that flex will help absorb some of the shock, absorb some of the impact, and prevent the joint itself from taking all the stress and breaking. It's like, maybe if I had this for months and I crashed it hundreds of times, eventually the TPU would start to wear and maybe rip, and then I would be like, oh, I see the downside of this. But just looking at it now, it seems like it's really well done and a smart way to put this style of frame together. You can see that I am using the GoPro Hero 11, and the nice thing about that is that it has this metal back, which is good because as I push it back, the frame pushes into it right here. And I don't know the exact geometry, but I can imagine if I had something like a Hero 9 or a Hero 10 with a screen on the back, that would instantly be smashed by the frame. So that seems like a little bit of an oversight. Might need a bumper or something there, or mount the camera a little higher, I don't know. But for the Hero 11, it's been just fine. The frame is designed for a bottom mount battery, and make sure that you use this. What is this? This is a little skid for the bottom mount battery, and it's important that you use it because otherwise the props will be so close to the ground that they'll rub on the ground. If you put this little skid on the bottom, it gives you just good and tight. It gives you just enough additional height that the props stay off the ground. When I first got this, I was like, well, dumbasses, the props are on the ground. How come, you know? And then I found that in the box and was like, oh, I see. I'm the dumbass. While we're talking about the props, if you've never put props on a pusher build like this before, it's a little bit non-intuitive. You see, you're used to looking at the quadcopter like this, and so we would put the props on like this. But the problem is that that's not how the flight controller sees the props. The flight controller sees the props from this perspective. So the props need to be put on the same as you would put on any other quadcopter's props, but when looking at them from the top down. So, in other words, we would look at the prop from the top down. It's going to be props in configuration. So we would need to have the props on like so, with the top of the prop facing up. It's exactly as if the motors were facing up and the props were up here. The prop simply moves down here and mounts on the motor shaft as so. And then while you're putting the prop nuts on, it'll look like they're upside down and incorrect, but as soon as you flip the quad back over again, they are correct again. Now, if you're so new to this that correctly putting the props on still doesn't tell you what you need to know, I've got a whole video about prop anatomy and how props can be put on quadcopters correctly and incorrectly, and I'll put a link to that in the video description if you want to check that out. I'm really torn on this quadcopter because on the one hand, Darwin FPV have done something truly interesting. There aren't very many people out there making waterproof quadcopters, and of the ones who do make waterproof quadcopters, they haven't usually made their own custom waterproof electronics. They usually have some kind of enclosed frame that tries to waterproof normal electronics, and that usually ends up being really clunky and not very... This is very well done. In fact, I think the electronics, the flight controller, the video transmitter, the ESC, and the camera are kind of the stars of the show here. And it's a good thing because you can buy them separately. The frame and the motors, to me, are the weakest parts of this build. The motors are way smaller than I'd prefer, but I might go, okay, well, I guess I just won't do like the ultimate acro freestyle with this quadcopter. But they also just, I think they aren't going to have the durability that I would prefer, whether that's because I bash them and they break or because I dunk them in the water and the bearings start to fail, as you can see that mine have already started to do. And the frame, like I want to like the frame, and as long as I didn't ever have to work on it, I would maybe be okay with it. As soon as you start having to work on this damn thing, like just getting in here to plug back, you can't even see with the camera where the dang video transmitter plug is. I had to kind of slide the video transmitter out of the frame and then slide the antenna cable out of the frame and plug it in and then slide it back in. And that's, I think, a big part of the reason why people moved away from this style of frame. It seems like an okay frame, but it would drive me crazy having to work with it on a day-to-day basis. Here's what I'll say. If you're looking for a bind and fly quadcopter that you can get wet and it will not immediately fail, this is a solid choice. It's going to do all the work for you. It is going to deliver something that will fly, that will get you footage of chasing a boat or chasing a water skier or something like that. And as long as it's freshwater and not saltwater, but it's nothing, saltwater is just a whole different ballgame. As long as it's freshwater, it will probably survive the day, get you the footage that you need to get. Eventually, you're going to end up replacing the motors, and when you do, I suggest you get something closer to like a maybe 2205. Ooh, something closer to maybe like a 2306 or 2207. That's going to do a little bit better job, but that's fine. It will get the job done. But I think the potential of this would be better realized by buying the video transmitter, the flight controller and ESC, and the camera, and putting them in your own build, right? Like, it's pretty easy to get pool noodles and attach them to a frame, and you do your own build. I think the electronics, the waterproof electronics, are really the star of the show. Whether you want to buy the bind and fly version or whether you want to build it yourself, I've got links to all of this stuff down in the video description. And it means a lot when you use those links because they're affiliate links. And in case you're new here, the way that that works is you click the link in the video description, you go to the store, you buy whatever you want to buy. You don't have to buy that. You buy this, you buy whatever. You click the link, you go to the store, you buy your stuff, you check out, and then I get a little commission. It's a really easy way for you to support the channel, is to just remember to click those links, and it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't raise the price or anything. It just means the store gives me a little kickback for sending you their way. If you are interested in doing something like this, then maybe you would just like to try to waterproof your existing quad. And if that is something you're interested in, I've got a video about conformal coating and waterproofing quadcopters. I'll put a card on screen about that, and you can check that out and see how it compares to just buying all this stuff from Darwin FPV and letting them do the hard work for you. We'll see what you think. I'll see you there.